The air in Miami that evening carried the weight of wealth. Neon lights reflected on polished marble floors as black-tie guests arrived one by one, each stepping out of cars that looked less like transportation and more like trophies. The annual South Florida Investment Gala wasn't just a party, it was a display of power, a silent auction of status. Every handshake carried hidden contracts, every smile hinted at potential millions. For Marcus Hill, however, it was just another shift. Wearing the neatly pressed uniform of the valet service, Marcus stood with a clipboard in hand, directing luxury vehicles into place. His posture was respectful, his expression neutral, though his chest tightened every time he slid behind the wheel of a machine worth more than his mother's entire house. Rolls-Royces, Ferraris, Bentleys, they all passed through his hands for a few fleeting seconds before being parked carefully in the reserved lot. "Careful with the brakes on this one," a silver-haired man said, tossing Marcus the keys to a Lamborghini. Marcus caught them smoothly, nodding with his usual polite response. "Yes, sir." Inside the car, he inhaled the faint scent of leather and cologne, his fingers brushing the steering wheel like it was forbidden fruit. For a moment, he imagined what it would feel like to own such a vehicle, not just to park it, but to claim it as his. He tucked the thought away quickly, exhaling as he shifted into gear and guided the car toward the rows of gleaming metal already lined up. When he returned to the entrance, another luxury sedan pulled up, its engine humming like restrained thunder. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a woman dressed in a shimmering emerald gown, her jewelry catching every flicker of light. This was Victoria Sloan, a name whispered in investment circles with equal parts admiration and envy. Known for her bold acquisitions and sharp tongue, she was the type of figure Marcus had read about in financial magazines during late-night study sessions. She extended her keys casually, her manicured fingers glinting with diamonds. "Be very careful," she said, her tone half command, half dismissal. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, taking the keys with steady hands. Victoria tilted her head, eyeing him with the faintest smirk. Her voice dropped to something meant for him alone, laced with superiority. "You'll never afford this car." The words hit harder than the Miami heat pressing against his skin. For an instant, Marcus felt exposed, like she had spoken his deepest insecurity aloud. He swallowed the sting, forcing a polite nod before stepping into the car. Inside, the silence seemed louder than the engine itself. Her words echoed in his head, not as truth but as a challenge. Driving the car to its designated space, Marcus's jaw tightened. He thought of Detroit, of his father working long hours in a greasy garage, of his mother balancing bills after his father passed. He thought of the countless rejection emails he had received when applying for internships, how his lack of family connections always outweighed his degree in finance. Victoria's smirk wasn't new. It was a face he had seen in countless rooms, one that judged him before he had the chance to prove himself. As he stepped out and locked the car, the reflection of the emerald gown shimmered faintly in the polished paint. Marcus whispered to himself, "One day." His voice was quiet but filled with certainty. That night, as the gala buzzed with laughter and the clinking of glasses, Marcus continued his work, returning cars and offering polite smiles. Yet something had shifted inside him. The humiliation he felt wasn't an ending. It was fuel. He knew he had to fight harder, study longer, and seize every chance, no matter how small. The road would be brutal, but he would not stay on the outside looking in forever. Before we dive deeper into Marcus's journey, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and transformation. This is only the beginning of a path that will test him at every turn, a path where the weight of one sentence, "You'll never afford this car," will ignite the fire of his future. Marcus walked back toward the entrance, clipboard in hand, standing tall despite the uniform. The night wasn't over, and neither was his story. Detroit winters had a way of cutting through even the thickest coats, and Marcus Hill felt every bit of it as he hustled from one side of the city to the other. By day, he worked at a small auto shop, changing tires and fixing brakes, honoring the craft his late father had mastered. By night, he attended finance classes at Wayne State University, his notebooks filled with meticulous calculations and case studies. He lived in two worlds, one of grease-stained hands and another of stock market charts. But neither world seemed to open doors for him. After graduation, Marcus had sent out more than 100 resumes. Banks, investment firms, insurance companies. Each rejection came with a polite variation of the same message. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Some didn't bother to reply at all. The silence was crushing. He would sit in his modest bedroom, the glow of his laptop screen reflecting the words, "Application status closed," wondering if anyone had even read his cover letter. His degree felt like a piece of paper that nobody cared about. Still, Marcus couldn't afford despair. His mother, Lorraine, had been diagnosed with hypertension, and the medical bills piled up alongside rent and utilities. She worked part-time at a local grocery store doing her best, but Marcus carried the heavier load. Every month he stretched his paycheck like a magician performing tricks, making sure nothing collapsed. One evening, after a long shift, Marcus joined his best friend Daniel Carter at a diner near the university. Daniel was studying computer science and carried a constant energy that Marcus envied. "Now you've got the brains, man," Daniel said, pointing at Marcus with a fry. "These firms don't see it yet, but they will. You just need one shot." Marcus stirred his coffee, the bitterness rising from the cup, mirroring the weight in his chest. One shot feels like asking for a miracle. Connections, that's what they care about. "My resume doesn't come with a famous last name." Daniel leaned closer, his voice firm. "Then build your own name. We're not here to play the game by their rules. We're here to write new ones." The conviction in his friend's tone gave Marcus a spark of strength. Yet the reality didn't change overnight. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus found himself back at the Valet stand in Miami during the summer, saving money while still chasing opportunities. He'd park another luxury car, smile politely, then rush home to send applications before dawn. Each rejection was another blow, but he refused to stop. His mother often reminded him of his father's resilience. "Your dad rebuilt engines that others threw away," she would say while folding laundry. "You're no different, Marcus. Life hands you broken pieces. You just have to make them run again." Her words became a quiet anthem in his mind. Still, reality tested him. At interviews, Marcus noticed the subtle glances at his skin, the way interviewers' eyes lingered on his inexpensive suit, how questions shifted toward whether he would fit the culture. He left those rooms with a handshake but no hope, sensing the judgment that never made it into official rejection letters. One Saturday, as he sat on the porch of his mother's house, the hum of passing cars on the Detroit streets seemed to mock him. He clenched his notebook, filled with strategies for investments he might never get the chance to make. But beneath the frustration, determination pulsed stronger. He whispered to himself, "They can overlook me now, but not forever." The road was long, filled with obstacles that seemed designed to break him, yet Marcus had no intention of stopping. The humiliation he endured in Miami still lingered like a wound, and each rejection poured salt into it. But instead of surrender, he carried that pain as fuel. The world wasn't ready to open doors for him, but Marcus was ready to knock harder, even if his fists bled. Atlanta's skyline rose like a promise, the glass towers gleaming under the Georgia sun. For Marcus Hill, arriving in this city felt like stepping into a different rhythm of life. The streets buzzed with energy, the blend of Southern tradition and modern ambition, creating a pulse he hadn't felt in Detroit. He had landed an entry-level role at a modest financial advisory firm, nothing glamorous, but it was his first real step inside the world he had chased for years. The office was smaller than he expected, tucked inside a mid-rise building surrounded by coffee shops and banks. On his first day, Marcus wore his only tailored suit, a navy piece he had saved up for. He walked in with his shoulders squared, determined to make an impression. "Marcus Hill?" a receptionist asked, smiling politely. "Welcome to Carter and Lowe, Mr. Lowe will see you shortly." He nodded, adjusting his tie. When Mr. Lowe arrived, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, his greeting was brief. "Glad you could join us, Marcus. We're a small team, so expect to wear many hats." Marcus replied quickly, "I'm ready to learn and contribute, sir." The first weeks were filled with humbling assignments. He made endless cold calls, dialing potential clients who hung up before he could finish his pitch. He fetched coffee, organized spreadsheets, and carried folders from one office to another. While others dismissed these tasks, Marcus treated each one as training. He studied the spreadsheets carefully, noting patterns in cash flows and investment returns. He listened in on client meetings, absorbing the language of persuasion and negotiation. But despite his effort, prejudice lingered like an invisible wall. Some clients, seeing him walk in, immediately assumed he was an assistant. Others directed questions to his white colleagues, even when Marcus had prepared the research himself. One evening, after a meeting where he had been ignored completely, he returned to his small apartment and sat in silence. The frustration gnawed at him, but surrender wasn't an option. He called his mother that night. "I feel like I'm invisible," he admitted. Her voice carried steady warmth. "Invisible doesn't mean powerless, Marcus. You're planting seeds. They don't notice now, but one day the roots will break through concrete." The next morning he carried her words with him. When colleagues dismissed him, he responded with discipline. When clients doubted his numbers, he ensured they were so precise that no one could question them. Slowly, Mr. Lowe began to notice. "You have an eye for detail," Lowe remarked one afternoon as Marcus presented a market analysis. "Keep that up, and you'll earn trust." Trust didn't come quickly, but Marcus wasn't rushing. Nights in his apartment were spent reviewing textbooks, market journals, and case studies. He scribbled notes until his eyes burned, determined to master every angle of the financial world. One Friday, while others left early for drinks, Marcus stayed late, refining a proposal for a small client account. His analysis revealed an overlooked opportunity that could increase the client's returns significantly. When he presented it Monday morning, the partners exchanged surprised looks. "Did you put this together?" Mr. Lowe asked. "Yes, sir," Marcus answered. The silence stretched, then Lowe nodded. "Impressive, we'll use this." It wasn't a promotion, nor a raise, but it was validation, a glimpse that his work could speak louder than bias. That night, walking home under the Atlanta streetlights, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead remained uncertain, yet for the first time he felt a door creak open. But small victories often come with larger tests. Marcus sensed that the challenges waiting for him would demand more than late nights and determination. They would test the very core of his resilience. Atlanta in spring carried a softness that eased the edges of long days. The dogwood trees bloomed along sidewalks, and the air held the promise of renewal. For Marcus Hill, however, renewal meant more than blossoms. It meant finding the cracks in the wall that separated him from real opportunity. The modest recognition he had earned at Carter & Lowe gave him confidence, but it wasn't enough. He needed connections, the kind that shaped futures. One evening, after another long day at the office, Marcus noticed a flyer pinned near a coffee shop. Startup Atlanta Mixer, entrepreneurs, investors, innovators, welcome. His pulse quickened. He hesitated, wondering if he belonged in such a space, but the voice of his mother echoed in his memory. Invisible doesn't mean powerless. The mixer was held in a refurbished warehouse downtown. Exposed brick walls framed the room, strung with warm lights that gave it a vibrant energy. Tables were scattered with pamphlets, business cards, and half-filled wine glasses. Entrepreneurs pitched their dreams in hurried conversations, each sentence carrying urgency. Marcus felt out of place in his thrift store blazer, yet he reminded himself he was here to learn, not to impress. As he moved between groups, listening more than speaking, a lively voice caught his attention. A woman stood in the center of a small circle, her gestures animated as she explained logistics models to two skeptical investors. She had dark hair pulled back neatly and spoke with a rhythm that carried both confidence and warmth. "And the issue isn't trucks," she said firmly. "It's inefficiency in distribution points. Solve that and you cut costs by 30%. The investors nodded politely but moved on, clearly unconvinced. The woman sighed, gathering her notes. Marcus, compelled by something beyond curiosity, approached. "You're right about distribution points," he said carefully. "I studied some numbers last month. The losses stack up faster than most people realize. She looked at him, surprised, then smiled faintly. Finally, someone who actually gets it. I'm Elena Torres. Marcus Hill, he replied, shaking her hand. I'm just trying to learn the ropes. Elena tilted her head, studying him. You don't sound like you're just learning. What do you do? I work at a financial advisory firm, Marcus admitted. Entry level. Lots of spreadsheets and cold calls. Her laugh was warm. Spreadsheets are where the truth hides. Investors just don't like to look that deep. They spent the next hour in conversation. Eleanor spoke about her logistics startup, the hurdles of funding, the frustration of being dismissed as too inexperienced. Marcus listened, interjecting with observations from his late-night studies. The more they spoke, the more he realized he wasn't just absorbing information. He was being challenged to think bigger. You've got sharp instincts, Eleanor said as the event wound down. Most people at these mixers just chase buzzwords. You actually analyze. Marcus felt a flicker of pride. I want to understand how people decide what to back. It feels like there's more to it than numbers. There is, Elena agreed. Numbers tell the story, but vision keeps it alive. Investors don't just buy balance sheets. They buy belief. Walking back to his apartment later that night, Marcus replayed her words. Belief. He had spent years proving his discipline, his precision, his endurance, but belief was different. Belief meant convincing others to see what he saw, even when the world said no. In the weeks that followed, Marcus stayed in touch with Eleanor. She introduced him to her circle of entrepreneurs, Latino founders, Black engineers, immigrant dreamers. They gathered in coffee shops and small offices, sharing struggles and strategies. Marcus listened, asked questions, and offered small pieces of advice where he could. Slowly his network grew beyond Carter and Lowe's office walls. Though he still faced the grind of spreadsheets and late nights, a new horizon opened before him. The path wasn't clear yet, but one thing had become certain: Marcus was no longer standing alone. He was stepping into a community where his voice mattered, and where vision, not pedigree, could define the future. Atlanta's summer was unforgiving, the air heavy with humidity that clung to Marcus Hill's shirt as he hurried through crowded sidewalks. Opportunity had finally come knocking. A small but ambitious tech startup had offered him a position as junior financial officer. It wasn't Carter and Lowe with its conservative suits and rigid structures. It was messy, unpredictable, and thrilling. Marcus felt as if he had been invited behind the curtain of innovation, where real risks and rewards collided. The startup's office was in a converted loft, whiteboards covering the walls with scribbled projections, ideas, and ambitious deadlines. The energy was intoxicating. Young engineers tapped at laptops, developers argued over features, and the founder, a charismatic man named Chris Matthews, moved between desks like a conductor in front of an orchestra. We're changing the way small businesses handle payments, Chris declared in their first team meeting. And with Marcus on board, our finances will finally match our vision. Marcus flushed with pride, determined to live up to the trust placed in him. He threw himself into the numbers, analyzing cash flows, drafting budgets, and warning against reckless spending. But his voice, though precise, often went unheard. Relax, Chris would say, brushing off concerns about expenses. You can't build something big without spending big. Investors love ambition. At first, Marcus convinced himself that maybe Chris was right. Deals seemed to be moving forward. Interest from venture capitalists buzzed in the air, and the office radiated optimism. But beneath the surface, Marcus saw cracks forming. The burn rate outpaced revenue, deadlines slipped, and promises to investors grew increasingly unrealistic. One night, as storm clouds gathered outside the loft windows, Marcus stayed late reviewing the latest financial reports. The numbers screamed disaster. They were running out of cash and fast. He drafted an urgent memo, highlighting the risks, the need for immediate cost-cutting, and the danger of overpromising. The next morning, he presented it to Chris. If we don't tighten expenses, we won't make payroll in 2 months. We need to slow down before everything collapses. Chris leaned back, his expression hardening. Marcus, this is why you're not in charge. Fear kills innovation. Investors don't want hesitation. They want confidence. The words stung, but Marcus bit back his frustration. He wanted to believe, to hold on to hope. Yet within weeks, the collapse began. Promised investments didn't arrive. Clients pulled out, citing delays and bugs. The loft that once buzzed with ambition now felt suffocated by tension. Paychecks arrived late, then stopped altogether. One evening, Chris called an emergency meeting. His face was pale, his voice strained. "We're shutting down, it's over." The silence that followed was heavier than any storm outside. Marcus sat frozen, the weight of his decision to join pressing down on him. He had invested not just time, but a small portion of his savings into the company, convinced it would grow. Now that money was gone, evaporated with the dream. Walking home through the sticky Atlanta night, Marcus felt failure wrap around him like a shroud. He replayed every warning sign, every ignored instinct, and blamed himself for not fighting harder. His mother's voice echoed faintly in his memory. "Life hands you broken pieces. You just have to make them run again." But tonight, the pieces felt too shattered to rebuild. Back in his apartment, Daniel found him sitting in silence. "You look like someone who just got punched by life," Daniel said gently. Marcus exhaled, his voice low. "I lost everything I put in." "I thought I was smarter than this." Daniel shook his head. "No, man, you didn't lose. You learned. This was tuition. Painful, expensive tuition, but tuition all the same." Marcus looked at him, uncertain, yet somewhere inside, beneath the sting, a new seed of understanding formed. Failure wasn't the end. It was a lesson. The flight to San Francisco felt like a passage into another universe. Marcus Hill sat by the window, staring at the endless clouds, his thoughts heavy with both disappointment and determination. Atlanta had given him his first taste of risk and loss, but now he was heading to Silicon Valley, a place where failure wasn't a stigma but a badge. Thanks to Daniel, who had secured a job with a promising tech company, Marcus had been introduced to people in venture capital. One of those connections finally opened a door, an analyst role at a mid-sized VC firm. When he first set foot in Palo Alto, the contrast to Detroit and Atlanta was striking. Cafes buzzed with engineers discussing code over cold brew, Teslas hummed silently down wide streets, and billboards advertised apps instead of cars or groceries. Opportunity seemed to hang in the air, thick as the fog rolling in from the bay. The firm's office occupied a sleek glass building with minimalist decor and walls adorned with photos of successful portfolio companies. Marcus, dressed in his best suit, walked in with cautious optimism. During orientation, he was introduced to the partners, all sharp in both attire and attitude. They nodded politely, though their eyes held that same flicker he had seen before: doubt. His supervisor, a young associate named Brian, gave him a tour. "You'll handle the initial data gathering," Brian explained. "Spreadsheets, due diligence reports, that sort of thing. Keep it neat, keep it fast." Marcus smiled. "Got it. Accuracy is my specialty." The work was grueling but familiar. He reviewed startups' financial statements, scrutinized business models, and compiled reports that other analysts skimmed in minutes. While his colleagues left at 6, Marcus stayed until midnight, double-checking formulas and reading pitch decks no one had asked him to review. He wanted more than accuracy. He wanted understanding. Still, recognition didn't come. In meetings, partners glanced past him. When founders presented, Marcus often sat quietly at the back, his questions uninvited. Once, after he suggested a probing question about a startup's revenue model, Brian whispered, "Let the partners handle the heavy lifting. We're here to support, not lead." The dismissal burned, but Marcus swallowed his frustration. Instead of retreating, he studied harder. He devoured books on venture capital, memorized case studies of failed and successful startups, and dissected the strategies of top investors. At night, Daniel's apartment became his classroom. "You're killing yourself with all these papers," Daniel joked one evening, walking in with takeout. Marcus shook his head. "I can't afford to be average. They already think I don't belong." "I have to know twice as much, maybe 3 times. Daniel's smile softened. "Then make sure you don't just know more. Make sure you see what they can't." Those words stayed with Marcus. Soon, he began noticing something the partners overlooked. The founders, no one took seriously. At networking events, flashy startups pitching buzzwords drew attention, but in the corners stood quiet, underestimated entrepreneurs. Marcus found himself drawn to them, women with prototypes sketched on napkins, immigrants with accents thick but ideas sharper than diamonds, minority founders presenting in worn-out shoes. One evening, after a long pitch session, Marcus walked out with a Nigerian engineer named Ade, who had just been dismissed. "They didn't even look at my numbers," Ade muttered, frustration heavy in his voice. Marcus replied, "Numbers don't matter to them unless you look like what they expect. But your model, it made sense." Ade glanced at him, surprised. "You're the first one who actually read it." Conversations like that became more frequent. Marcus was no longer just absorbing knowledge, he was starting to see opportunity where others only saw risk. The irony wasn't lost on him, the outsider noticing the outsiders. Back in the office, he remained the quiet analyst, dutifully submitting reports. But within himself, something had shifted. He realized the power of perspective, the advantage of standing at the margins. For the first time, Marcus sensed he might not just survive in Silicon Valley, he might carve a space that no one else even saw. The rain in San Francisco came down in steady sheets, blurring the outlines of Market Street as Marcus Hill ducked into a cafe buzzing with chatter. He had agreed to meet Elena Torres again, months after their first encounter in Atlanta. She was in town pitching her logistics startup to potential backers, though judging by the slight exhaustion in her tone over the phone, the process hadn't been kind. She was already seated when Marcus arrived, a notebook open in front of her, pen tapping impatiently. Her sharp eyes softened when she saw him. "Marcus Hill," she greeted with a wry smile. "The analyst who actually listens. Sit down, I need good company after a day of rejection." Marcus slid into the chair across from her. "Rough meetings." "Brutal," she admitted. "One guy didn't even let me finish before saying, 'We don't back founders who don't have a proven track record.' Another told me to find a male co-founder if I wanted credibility." She exhaled hard, frustration visible in every line of her face. "Sometimes it feels like I'm selling them oxygen and they still won't buy it." Marcus understood that sting too well. He nodded slowly. "I've seen the same thing from the other side of the table. Ideas dismissed before they're even heard." She tilted her head, curious. "So why stay in that world?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because the numbers don't lie. If I can see value where they don't, that's an advantage. And maybe people like us can change the rules." Elena's lips curved into a half smile. "I like that. People like us? Outsiders with something to prove." Over cups of strong coffee, their conversation stretched. Elena shared her struggles building supply chain software designed to cut costs for small businesses. Marcus asked pointed questions, testing her assumptions, not to doubt her but to sharpen the vision. She responded with fire, defending her choices yet open to adjustments. "Why aren't you on the investment side already?" she asked finally. "You've got the brain for it." Marcus chuckled softly. "Because brains aren't enough. Pedigree and connections still run the game. Right now, I'm just the guy crunching spreadsheets while others get the credit." "Then stop being just that guy," Elena said firmly. "Use what you've got. You see potential others don't. That's power." Her words lit something inside him. For months he had been helping overlooked founders in quiet conversations after pitch sessions, offering advice on how to refine numbers or frame ideas. He never asked for payment. He simply wanted to contribute. But Elena made him realize he was already building something more than goodwill. He was building trust and reputation among those who needed it most. The weeks that followed solidified this realization. Marcus began meeting with founders in borrowed conference rooms, diners, and shared workspaces. He reviewed their financials, explained market trends, and taught them how to prepare pitches that couldn't be ignored. Some evenings Daniel joined, offering insights into technical aspects. Elena became a constant presence, introducing him to others in her circle. Word spread quietly. There was an analyst in Silicon Valley who took meetings no one else would. who gave time and insight without dismissing people for their backgrounds. Marcus didn't see himself as a savior. He saw himself as someone leveling the playing field, even slightly. But the gratitude in the eyes of those he helped fueled him in ways his day job never had. One night, after finishing a long session with a young Latina founder, Elena turned to him as they walked out into the misty night. "You realize you're already leading something, right?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "I'm just trying to help," she smiled knowingly. "That's exactly why people follow you." The rain fell softly, streetlights glowing against the wet pavement. Marcus felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. The path ahead was still unclear, but one thing was undeniable: he was no longer just an analyst in the shadows. With allies like Elena and the growing circle around him, he was building the beginnings of something far greater than himself. The San Francisco fog rolled in thick that evening, wrapping the city in a grey silence, as Marcus Hill sat hunched over his dining table. Papers covered every inch of it: business plans, compliance checklists, and hastily scribbled notes. The idea that had been brewing inside him for months was now on the verge of taking form. He wanted to create something of his own, a fund dedicated to the very people the system ignored. But ideas were easier than execution. Every step felt like climbing a mountain with weights strapped to his back. He had spent hours researching the legal requirements for starting an investment group, each regulation another barrier. Licenses, audits, registrations. The process was intimidating, designed to keep amateurs out. And he wasn't just lacking legal experience, he was lacking money. Daniel leaned against the counter, sipping coffee, as he watched his friend drown in paperwork. "You look like you're building a spaceship, not a fund." Marcus rubbed his forehead, exhaustion lining his face. "Sometimes it feels harder than that. I can see the vision so clearly, but without capital, without credibility, it's just words on paper." Daniel shrugged with a grin. "Every system can be hacked, legally, I mean. Think small first. Prove it works, then scale. Isn't that what startups do?" Marcus considered the thought. Start small, build trust, then expand. A week later, Elena joined their late-night sessions. She spread out her own notes, scribbling ideas with fierce energy. "You've got something here, Marcus. Investors are tired of chasing the same shiny objects. If you can show results with overlooked founders, you'll have a unique edge." "Unique doesn't always equal funded," Marcus muttered. Elena fixed him with her determined gaze. "Which is why we're going to pitch until someone listens. You have me, you have Daniel, and you have every founder you've already helped. That's credibility. It's not pedigree, but it's proof of character." The trio worked tirelessly. Marcus drafted proposals highlighting gaps in the market. Daniel created data models projecting potential returns, and Elena reached out to contacts who might know sympathetic angels, yet rejection followed them like a shadow. At their first pitch meeting, an older investor leaned back in his chair, smirking as Marcus laid out his vision. "You're talking about betting on the leftovers," the man said dismissively. "There's a reason these people can't get funding." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Or maybe there's a reason the market keeps missing opportunities. Efficiency isn't just in logistics, it's in capital too. And inefficiency creates profit gaps." The investor waved him off. "Too risky. Too inexperienced." Dozens of meetings went the same way. Some were polite, others blunt, all ending with the same rejection. At times, Marcus wanted to slam his fist on the table, to shout that he wasn't asking for charity, but for belief. But each time, he steadied himself. Losing composure would only confirm their doubts. Late one night, after another string of failed pitches, Marcus stared out the apartment window at the glow of the Bay Bridge. His reflection in the glass looked worn, but his eyes still carried fire. "I won't stop," he whispered. Daniel, sitting on the couch, spoke without looking up from his laptop. "Good. Because eventually one of them will regret saying no." Eleanor added softly, "And when that happens, you'll be ready." The rejections piled up, but so did Marcus's resolve. Each no sharpened his approach, each closed door teaching him where to knock next. Though capital was scarce, belief was not. With Daniel's unwavering loyalty, and Elena's relentless faith, Marcus began to realize that the foundation of his fund wasn't money, it was people, and that, in itself, was worth more than the investors could yet see. Detroit greeted Marcus Hill with a familiar mix of grit and resilience. The streets carried the echoes of factories long closed, but also the hum of new beginnings. For Marcus, returning to his hometown wasn't just a visit, it was a search. He was looking for the kind of opportunity everyone else overlooked, the kind of diamond buried under dust. Through a local contact, Marcus heard about a struggling electric vehicle startup operating out of a warehouse on the city's edge. Intrigued, he arranged a meeting. The company, Motorworks EV, had ambitious dreams, but was hanging by a thread. Their prototype cars sat half-finished, wires spilling out like veins exposed, while engineers argued over funding shortfalls. The founder, a weary but determined man named Charles Benton, greeted Marcus with guarded eyes. "I'll be honest," Charles said, motioning him into the cluttered office. "We're out of time. Banks won't loan us another dime, and investors won't touch us. We've got innovation but no runway." Marcus studied the financial statements spread across the desk. The numbers were bleak: mounting debt, shrinking reserves, deadlines looming. But beneath the red ink, Marcus saw potential. Their battery technology wasn't just good, it was revolutionary, capable of doubling range at a fraction of the cost. "This isn't a lost cause," Marcus said finally, tapping the papers. "It's an overlooked one. You don't need more hype. You need a strategy that buys you time." Charles leaned back, skepticism in his voice. "And you're going to save us?" "With what money?" "I don't have capital," Marcus admitted, "but I have expertise. Give me partial equity, and I'll restructure your finances. If I fail, you lose nothing more than you already have. If I succeed, you'll have leverage when the right investors come calling." The room fell silent. Charles studied him, weighing the desperation of his situation against the conviction in Marcus's tone. Finally, he extended his hand. "Deal." The weeks that followed tested Marcus in ways he hadn't imagined. He worked side by side with the engineers, learning their process while renegotiating supplier contracts and cutting unnecessary expenses. He convinced creditors to extend deadlines, crafted detailed reports, and positioned Motorworks not as a company begging for survival, but as a startup poised for growth. The turning point came when Marcus discovered an overlooked government program offering grants for clean energy innovation in underserved regions. He spent sleepless nights drafting applications, tailoring every line to highlight Motorworks' unique technology and potential impact on Detroit's revival. When the approval letter arrived, Charles could hardly believe it. "A government contract," he whispered, eyes wide. "Marcus, do you realize what this means?" "It means you've got runway," Marcus replied, smiling for the first time in days. "And leverage. You're not begging anymore, you're negotiating." News of the contract spread quickly. Investors who had once dismissed Motorworks now circled back with renewed interest. Suddenly, Marcus found himself fielding calls from firms eager to buy in, the same firms that had ignored his pitches months earlier. For Marcus, the breakthrough wasn't just financial. It was validation that his vision of overlooked potential was real, that betting on the underestimated could yield extraordinary returns. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, Marcus stepped outside the warehouse. The Detroit air was cool, carrying faint scents of oil and steel, reminders of his father's garage. He looked at the half-finished EVs under the warehouse lights and felt a surge of pride. Daniel's voice echoed through the phone when Marcus called him. "So you're telling me you turned a dying company into a gold mine?" Marcus chuckled. "Not a gold mine yet. But for the first time I know I'm on the right path." What he didn't yet realize was that this single deal, born in the shadows of his hometown, would change the trajectory of everything that followed. The ballroom of the New York Midtown Conference Center gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble floors, the kind of place where fortunes were made over handshakes and lost with careless words. Marcus Hill walked in with a quiet confidence, his suit tailored sharply, his mind sharpened even more by the months of work he had poured into Motorworks EV. The company's turnaround had given him credibility, enough to earn a speaking slot at the prestigious East Coast Investment Summit, As he scanned the crowd of investors and founders, his chest tightened. There she was, Victoria Sloan. The woman whose words had haunted him since Miami, now standing across the room with a glass of champagne. Her emerald dress replaced by a sleek navy gown, but her air of superiority unchanged. Around her, other investors clustered, hanging on her every remark. When it came time for Marcus to present, he stepped onto the stage with calm determination. He spoke about overlooked opportunities, about how underestimated founders and undervalued markets often held untapped potential. He cited Motorworks as an example, walking through the numbers with precision. The audience listened, intrigued, though some faces carried doubt. As he wrapped up, a hand shot up from the back. Victoria Sloan, her voice carried smoothly through the microphone. "Mr. Hill, your story is certainly, inspiring. But let's be honest here. Ambition without pedigree is just wishful thinking. What makes you believe that you, without a track record or established reputation, can compete against firms that have been shaping markets for decades?" The room shifted, eyes darting between them. Marcus felt the sting of her words, the echo of that night in Miami when she told him he'd never afford her car. But this time, he didn't flinch. He met her gaze, his tone steady. Pedigree builds comfort, but innovation rarely comes from comfort. It comes from those who've had to see what others ignore. "I don't compete by playing their game. I compete by finding value where they don't bother to look." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded thoughtfully, others raised eyebrows. Victoria's smirk didn't fade. "Strong words," she replied coolly, "but markets don't reward sentiment, they reward results." "Do you truly believe one lucky deal in Detroit makes you a player in this arena?" Marcus inhaled, grounding himself. "I don't believe it," he said firmly. "I know it, because I've seen what happens when you give underestimated talent a chance. That Detroit deal wasn't luck, it was vision backed by discipline. And it won't be the last." The moderator quickly stepped in, redirecting the conversation, but the tension lingered in the air. Marcus finished his presentation, exiting the stage with his pulse pounding. He knew some investors would side with Victoria's skepticism, but he also saw curiosity in others' eyes, curiosity that could open doors. Later, as the crowd mingled over cocktails, Marcus found himself near Victoria once again. She didn't wait for him to speak. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that," she said, swirling her drink. "But spirit doesn't win deals. Connections do. You're in the wrong league." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Maybe. Or maybe it's time the league changed." For a moment their eyes locked, her icy confidence meeting his quiet fire. Then she turned away with a dismissive smile, leaving him standing alone. But Marcus didn't feel defeated. He felt sharpened. Every word she spoke, every doubt she cast, only strengthened his resolve. Victoria Sloan represented the walls he had spent his life pushing against, and someday, he promised himself, he would not just push. He would own the ground she stood on. The months after the New York summit moved quickly, as if Marcus Hill had stepped onto a moving train he could barely control. Motorworks EV's turnaround had placed him in the spotlight, but what truly changed everything was the growing stream of founders who sought him out. They weren't the polished, Ivy League, pedigreed entrepreneurs who usually filled venture capital offices. They were builders, hustlers, visionaries from communities overlooked for too long. Marcus took every meeting he could, often in cramped co-working spaces or noisy cafes. A Latina founder pitching a logistics platform, a former truck driver developing fleet management software, an immigrant couple designing sustainable packaging. Each of them brought ideas dismissed by mainstream investors. Marcus listened, questioned, and pushed them to refine their visions. More importantly, he started putting money on the table. Small checks at first, but enough to keep projects alive. His fund, though still modest, began to attract attention. Articles in local business journals carried headlines like "The Outsider Investor Who Bets on the Overlooked." Soon, national outlets followed. A feature in Fast Company called him the man turning underdogs into contenders. Marcus felt pride reading those words, but he also felt the pressure mounting. Daniel noticed it one night as they reviewed a potential deal in their shared office. "You're running yourself into the ground," Daniel said, pushing his laptop away. "You can't take every pitch personally." Marcus rubbed his temples. "These people don't have backup plans, Daniel. If I don't show up for them, who will?" Daniel leaned back, exhaling. "That's noble. But if you collapse, none of this survives. Scale doesn't just mean more deals, it means building a structure that lasts." Marcus knew he was right. That realization drove him to expand his team, hiring 2 junior analysts and a compliance officer. The fund's operations became more organized, their reach wider. Elena continued to advise, her sharp instincts invaluable in spotting founders with resilience to match their ideas. Still, not everyone welcomed Marcus's rise. Established firms started circling the same deals he targeted, often trying to outbid him or discredit his picks. At one conference, a rival investor remarked loudly, "Hill chases scraps. Let him play in the kiddie pool while the adults handle the real markets." Marcus overheard, but kept his composure. Later, he told Elena, "They're paying attention now. That's a sign we're doing something right." The results spoke louder than the insults. 2 of his early portfolio companies landed significant contracts, one with a major retailer, another with a regional government. Returns began flowing back into the fund, and with them, new investors curious about Marcus's unconventional strategy. For the first time, he wasn't begging for capital. People were asking to be part of his vision, yet with growth came new tension. Marcus found himself caught between his ideals and the demands of larger investors. Some wanted him to abandon smaller, riskier founders in favor of safer, proven ventures. One meeting with a potential backer ended with a sharp ultimatum. "Play the game like everyone else or you'll be left behind." Marcus left that meeting with a storm inside him. He called his mother from a quiet street in San Francisco, her voice grounding him as always. "Don't let them turn you into something you're not," Lorraine said. "Your father built his reputation fixing what others threw away. That's in your blood. Don't forget it." Her words steeled him. Marcus decided he would scale, but on his own terms. He would grow his fund without abandoning the very people who gave it meaning. The path ahead was bigger, louder, more dangerous, but also filled with possibilities. Success had opened doors, but it also painted a target on his back. Marcus knew the next phase of his journey would not just test his vision, but his very identity. The glow of San Francisco's skyline reflected through the windows of the office Marcus Hill had fought so hard to build. Rows of desks now filled the space, analysts buzzing over spreadsheets, interns rushing with reports. The hum of success should have been satisfying, but Marcus felt something different, a heaviness pressing against his chest. Growth had made them visible, but it had also made them fragile. Tensions began to surface within the very team that had carried him this far. Daniel, his closest friend and co-founder, sat across the conference table one evening, his jaw clenched. "You don't listen anymore," Daniel said sharply. "I bring concerns about our tech infrastructure, and you wave them off like they're distractions." "Do you even hear me, Marcus?" Marcus leaned back, exhausted from back-to-back meetings. "I hear you, but we can't slow down every time there's a hiccup. Investors want results yesterday. If we hesitate, we lose momentum." Daniel's voice rose. "It's not a hiccup. If our systems crash, we lose credibility. You think branding and speeches will cover for that?" "No, they won't." Silence stretched between them. The unspoken truth lingered. Success had shifted their relationship. What once was a brotherhood now felt like a battlefield of priorities. Elena, too, had grown frustrated. She cornered Marcus after a long strategy session. Her tone was softer but carried disappointment. "You're burning yourself out. And worse, you're dragging the rest of us with you." Long hours, impossible expectations, endless deals. "When do we breathe?" Marcus rubbed his temples, fatigue written across his face. "I can't afford to slow down, Elena. Every time we pause, someone else tries to take what we've built." She sighed, shaking her head. "What's the point of building if the foundation cracks? We started this to give overlooked founders a chance, not to turn into the same machine that ignores people." Her words struck him deeply. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of his apartment, replaying both Daniel's anger and Elena's disappointment. Had ambition blinded him? He thought of his mother's wisdom, of his father's patience repairing engines one bolt at a time. Somewhere along the way, he had lost that rhythm, trading it for relentless speed. The breaking point came during a tense negotiation with a potential partner. Marcus had pushed his team hard, demanding late-night revisions and flawless presentations. In the meeting, one of his analysts made a minor error, and Marcus snapped, his frustration spilling out in front of everyone. The silence in the room was deafening. Afterward, Daniel pulled him aside, eyes blazing. "That wasn't you, at least not the you I know. You're turning into the same people we swore we'd prove wrong." The accusation cut deep. Marcus walked out of the office, needing air. He wandered through the streets, the cool night mist clinging to his skin, the city lights blurring as doubts consumed him. Was he becoming the very gatekeeper he had fought against? He stopped at a small diner, the kind he used to frequent back in Detroit. Sitting in a corner booth, he scribbled in his notebook, not financial models this time, but questions. What do I stand for? What do we stand for? The next morning he called a team meeting. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried humility. "I've been pushing too hard. I forgot why we started this. I let pressure cloud my judgment and I let it affect all of you. That ends now." Daniel crossed his arms, skeptical, but Elena gave a faint nod. Marcus continued. "We'll scale smart, not reckless. We'll delegate, trust, and remember that this isn't just about deals. It's about people. I can't do this alone and I won't try to anymore." The room was quiet, but something shifted. A crack had formed, yes, but cracks can also let in light. Marcus knew rebuilding trust would take time, but for the first time in weeks, he felt aligned again, with himself, with his team, and with the mission that had brought them together. Detroit's skyline glowed faintly in the evening light as Marcus Hill sat in the Motorworks EV boardroom, his fingers interlaced, his jaw set. The company that had once been dismissed as a failure was now on the verge of becoming a battleground. Rumors had spread, a major acquisition attempt was underway, and the bidder was none other than Sloan Capital. When Charles Benton, Motorworks founder, shared the news, his voice carried both awe and worry. "Victoria Sloan wants a controlling stake. She's offering terms that could stabilize us in the short term, but—" He paused, eyes flicking to Marcus. "We'd lose our independence. We'd become her company." Marcus felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't just business. It was personal. He remembered her smirk in Miami, her cold dismissal in New York. If Sloan Capital won, not only would Motorworks slip from his grasp, but everything he stood for would be undermined. "Charles," Marcus said evenly, "if we let her take this, Motorworks won't be Motorworks anymore. It'll just be another trophy in her portfolio. We can't let that happen." Charles frowned. "Then what's the alternative?" "We don't have the cash to fight her off." Marcus leaned forward. "We don't need to match her dollar for dollar. We need strategy, partnerships, allies." That night, Marcus reached out to every contact he had built. Elena connected him with logistics investors sympathetic to his mission. Daniel crunched numbers late into the night, mapping out scenarios that showed how a consortium could outmaneuver Sloan Capital. Calls stretched past midnight, Marcus's voice raw but unyielding. One investor challenged him bluntly. "Hill, why should we risk our money backing you against Victoria Sloan? She's established. You're still proving yourself." Marcus answered without hesitation. "Because she sees Motorworks as a profit line. I see it as the future of American innovation, rooted in Detroit's revival. If you back me, you're not just betting on returns. You're betting on building something that lasts." The conviction in his tone broke down resistance. Slowly, commitments trickled in. Smaller investors, minority-led funds, even a few angels who believed in his vision rallied behind him. Piece by piece, Marcus assembled the resources needed to counter Sloan Capital's advance. The decisive moment came at a tense board meeting. Victoria Sloan herself was present, her navy suit crisp, her expression sharp as glass. She laid out her proposal with the confidence of someone used to winning. "Our firm can provide Motorworks with stability, scale, and credibility, Under Sloan Capital, your technology won't just survive, it will dominate." Her words hung in the air like a final verdict. Then Marcus rose. "With all due respect, Ms. Sloan," he began, his voice calm but carrying steel, "Motorworks doesn't need to be absorbed to succeed. It needs to remain true to its mission, and I'm here to ensure that happens." He presented his counteroffer, an alliance of investors he had gathered, enough to secure controlling shares. Gasps echoed around the room as the document slid across the table. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her composure cracking just slightly. "You," she said, almost incredulous, "you think you can block Sloan Capital?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I don't think it. I know it. Because while you were chasing trophies, I was building partnerships. While you dismissed people, I listened. And now the company you wanted belongs to the people who believe in it, not to you." The boardroom fell silent. Charles looked from Victoria to Marcus, then slowly nodded. The vote was taken, and the result was clear. Marcus's consortium had won. Victoria gathered her papers, her voice icy. "Enjoy your victory, Mr. Hill. But remember, every king eventually meets a stronger rival." Marcus didn't flinch. "Then I'll be ready." As she left, the room exhaled collectively. For Marcus, it wasn't just a business win. It was the moment he reclaimed his dignity from the night he was told he'd never afford her car. The boardroom in Midtown Manhattan was colder than Marcus Hill expected, its walls lined with glass that framed the city below like a living painting. Executives shuffled papers, assistants whispered into phones, and the tension was palpable. This was no ordinary meeting. This was the reckoning. Marcus had come to finalize the takeover that had rattled Sloan Capital to its core. He walked in calmly, his tailored charcoal suit fitting like armor, every step measured. Around the polished mahogany table, board members looked up, some curious, others skeptical. At the far end sat Victoria Sloan, her expression carved from stone. She had been here before, victorious in countless battles of power, but tonight the ground was different. "Mr. Hill," one board member began politely, "thank you for joining us. Today we'll review the final terms of the Motorworks acquisition." Marcus set his folder down with quiet precision. "Let's be clear," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't an acquisition by Sloan Capital. The company is now under new hands, ours." All eyes flicked to Victoria. She didn't move at first, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. Finally, she leaned forward, her tone cutting. "Do you realize what you've done? You've put yourself in a position you can't sustain. Controlling shares don't make you invincible." Marcus met her gaze evenly. "Neither does pedigree. I've seen too many companies gutted in the name of profit. That won't happen here." For a moment, silence ruled. Then a younger board member, clearly impressed, spoke up. "Mr. Hill, if you can deliver on the promises you've made, then perhaps this is the future Motorworks needs." Victoria's eyes snapped toward the man, her displeasure obvious. Yet even she couldn't deny the weight of Marcus's position. He had rallied investors, secured government support, and now stood as the face of Motorworks' next chapter. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The valet she once mocked was now dictating terms across the table from her. After the meeting adjourned, Marcus gathered his papers. Victoria rose slowly, approaching him near the doorway. Up close, her eyes carried something different, not just disdain, but recognition. "You've made your point," she said softly, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "But don't confuse one victory with dominance. The market doesn't forgive mistakes." Marcus's answer was calm, deliberate. "Neither does memory. I remember the words you spoke to me years ago. And I remember how they lit a fire I'll never put out. You gave me more than insult, Mrs. Sloan. You gave me resolve." For the first time, her composure cracked. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed her face. She straightened quickly, her mask returning. "We'll see how long you last, Mr. Hill." Marcus watched her leave, feeling not triumph alone, but clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proving that the game could be played differently. that those shut out of boardrooms could build their own tables. That evening, as he left the skyscraper, the city lights spread before him like a constellation. His phone buzzed with messages: congratulations from allies, updates from Daniel, encouragement from Elena. But he paused, taking in the night air, remembering Detroit's grit, Miami's sting, Atlanta's grind, and Silicon Valley's fire. He wasn't the same man who once parked cars outside galas, shrinking under cruel words. He was a leader now, forged through struggle, tempered by failure, driven by a vision larger than himself. The reckoning wasn't just with Victoria Sloan. It was with every doubt, every rejection, every moment he had been told no. And tonight, standing in the heart of New York, Marcus knew he had answered them all. The morning light filtered softly through Marcus Hill's office windows, casting long shadows across the polished desk where contracts and reports lay neatly stacked. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. The journey had been brutal, filled with rejection, failure, and moments when the weight seemed unbearable. Yet here he was, the owner of controlling shares in Motorworks EV, leader of a growing fund, and a man who had turned humiliation into legacy. His mother visited that day, her steps slow but steady. She gazed around the office with pride, eyes shimmering. "Your father would have loved to see this," she whispered, running her hand along the edge of the desk. Marcus smiled softly. "Everything I did started with him, with both of you. He rebuilt engines. I just rebuilt chances." She cupped his face gently. "No, Marcus. You built a future." Later, Elena joined him, her tone half teasing, half serious. "So, Mr. Big Shot Investor, how does it feel to finally sit on the other side of the table?" He chuckled. "Honestly? Strange, because I don't want to be the kind of investor I once feared. This isn't about power, it's about responsibility." Elena nodded approvingly. "Then keep it that way. That's what makes you different." Daniel, ever the realist, chimed in from his seat by the window. "Different is good. But remember, pressure doesn't stop here. If anything, it doubles." Marcus met his friend's gaze. "I know, but I've learned not to carry it alone." The victories continued stacking. Motorworks rolled out its first commercial fleet, gaining national attention. Other startups backed by Marcus's fund grew steadily, proving that overlooked founders could indeed build thriving companies. Headlines shifted. From Valet to visionary, Marcus Hill redefines venture capital. The world that once ignored him now leaned in to listen. Still, what mattered most to Marcus wasn't prestige, it was impact. He launched an initiative called the Hill Foundation, dedicated to mentoring minority entrepreneurs, providing seed funding, and creating opportunities in places long neglected. When asked why, his answer was simple: because no one should be told they'll never afford their dreams. Months later, fate brought Marcus and Victoria Sloan face to face once more at a global investment forum. The room was buzzing as always, investors trading predictions over glasses of wine. Victoria approached him, her usual confidence intact, but tempered by something new, a quiet respect. "You proved me wrong," she admitted, her voice steady. "I underestimated you." Marcus didn't gloat, didn't mock her. Instead, he replied with calm dignity. "I didn't set out to prove you wrong. I set out to prove myself right." She held his gaze for a long moment, then offered the faintest nod before walking away. That small acknowledgement felt more final than any victory. Standing alone for a moment, Marcus exhaled deeply. The boy from Detroit, the valet humiliated in Miami, the analyst ignored in Silicon Valley, he had carried them all to this point. Every rejection, every insult, every sleepless night had shaped the man who now stood unshaken. As the forum continued around him, Marcus thought of the countless dreamers still waiting outside locked doors, still hearing the same words he once heard. "You'll never afford this." His mission wasn't finished, it had only begun. Before we close Marcus's journey, remember this: resilience isn't born from comfort, but from fire. If his story inspired you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful journeys of transformation. And don't stop here. Click the video suggested on your screen to keep watching stories that prove no barrier is unbreakable. Marcus Hill smiled as he stepped back into the crowd. The future was vast, and this time, he wasn't chasing a dream. He was building one for others to follow.